Okay, I'm going to try and get a part done for this. I don't even remember which part this would be. Part 3, I think? Okay. Preparing a tea party for Solange. After getting what was more or less a scolding from Riarda, I finished lunch and started heading back to the library for the afternoon, thinking over what I had been told on the way. I needed to contain myself, which meant not forcefully closing the distance between Solange and me, speaking only of what Riarda had permitted me to mention, and studying noble conversations and socializing based on Riarda's criticisms of my performance once I arrived back at my room. There were only 2 questions I was permitted to ask Solange, whether she had time to participate in tea parties, and whether she had participated in tea parties with anyone else. That was my limit for the day. "Milady's back," Schwartz said when I arrived at the library. "Milady, welcome," Weiss added. "I've come to continue my reading from before. May I have the key to one of the carols?" I asked. I then greeted Solange, who was in the work area by the counter. "Good afternoon, Professor Solange. I do apologize for troubling you with my selfishness earlier. My excitement for the library caused me to forget myself." "Think nothing of it, Lady Rosamine. I understand just how invested you are in this humble library," she replied, glancing up from her writing with a smile and the kindly eyes of a grandmother looking at her grandchild. I sighed in relief, glad that she accepted my apology. Professor Solange, you manage the library yourself, correct? Do you ever have the time to attend or hold tea parties?" "I do have more time than usual at the moment, given how few students are using the library. However, things will get increasingly busier as some finish their classes early and begin to socialize, while others prepare for upcoming final exams. During the time I will neither participate in nor hold tea parties. I could have done so in the past when there were multiple librarians, but..." She trailed off, then looked at Schwartz and Weiss with a smile. "Schwartz and Weiss helping me now. My work has become much easier, and I am not nearly as lonely. I owe you much, Lady Rosamine. Whew, it's nice to hear I'm not just being a pain in the neck." It was true that my awakening of Schwartz and Weiss had been purely coincidental, and I wasn't actually being all that useful myself, but still. I had been worried about making a bad impression, so knowing that she thought at least a little well of me was a massive comfort. "If you are able, I would very much appreciate an opportunity to speak with you leisurely," I said. "Are you available at any point? There is much I wish to discuss, just Schwartz and Weiss, as well as the books I am making." "The books you are making?" Solange asked with her blue eyes widening in surprise. "You truly do love books, don't you, Lady Rosamine?" I nodded with a grin. "I am in the middle of compiling the night stories sung by minstrels and the stories that Ehrenfest's mothers tell their children. To be more accurate, I had already finished one night book, which was now being both printed and sold, but I was still collecting more stories, so my statement wasn't entirely untrue. In any case, I was mentioning it to catch her interest as a Royal Academy librarian and to hopefully encourage her to come to my tea party. "Oh my, you love stories as well as study resources. We have a few stories here as well, though. There aren't all that many, I must admit. Shall I take you to them?" "Please do. I would love to read them." Solange led me past all the first-floor bookcases filled with study resources and over to a corner where some old, rarely used documents were being kept. On the way there, she mentioned that not many students read storybooks since they only cared about studying for finals or getting money by transcribing resources for arch nobles. "You know, please just shut up in there!" Royal Academy lectures were held during the winter, and since most students had their schedules packed with socializing in their school curriculum, few had the time to read for fun. And I imagine that most people wouldn't read for fun in that world. "Here are the storybooks," Solange said when we reached the corner. "This is also where you will find transcribed copies of the Bible." "I thank you ever so much," I replied. "Schwartz, please go and open a carol for Feline and me." I stepped inside our carol the moment it was ready, with Riarda following close behind, carrying a number of storybooks. I read through them and organized their names and summaries into my ever-growing register. Most night stories followed the same beats of the protagonists, going on an adventure to defeat a fey beast or multiple fey beasts, but that wasn't to say these were the only ones available. Some focused on the friendship between knights, while others featured the trials and tribulations of a lesser duchy's knight order upon earning the hourly knight's order of a greater duchy. All in all, there were a good variety of content. The only problem with these books was that language they used was considerably old. This made the stories hard to read, and some had evidently been transcribed so hastily that making out even the letters was near enough impossible. "Lady Rosamond, I'm finding this quite difficult. I think I need to study more, Feline said. She was summarizing the storybooks the same as I was, but her slower reading speed was stalling her progress. I personally wasn't struggling with the night stories too much since I was used to reading the much more elaborate and euphemism-ridden Bible, but the same couldn't be said for Feline. She was more accustomed to studying with the simple text of my rewritten picture Bibles, and she didn't yet have much experience with older books. You will need to fetch a book on older language that you can study, Feline. If you cannot read old documents, you will struggle with scholarly work in the future. Indeed, I will do my best. And so we spent the rest of the afternoon reading night stories in the library. I decided to borrow one to take back to the dormitory with me. If possible, I wanted to use it as inspiration to write a story myself. Weiss, I wish to borrow this book. Okay, deposit, milady, 3 large golds. That's a lot. Ugh, I hate that taste. I was well aware that books were expensive, but the cost of the deposit still caught me by surprise. Only in retrospect did I truly appreciate how incredible the libraries back on Earth were for lending out books for free. I wanted to pray in honor of the mighty Ranganathan, who had established free lending with his 5 laws of library science. I need to spread printing far and wide before free lending can even be considered a pipe dream. Why must the road ahead of me be so long? The next day, Cornelius and Hartmut were going to join us in the library. They were surprised to learn it contained any night stories to begin with. Apparently they had thought it stored only study resources and research notes. It makes sense for them to store more than just study resources, I said. The bookroom in Ehrenfest Castle contains documents related to the work done in the castle. So it would not be logical for the library to contain documents related to other aspects of the Royal Academy? It always seems like the library contains nothing but study resources because these kinds of documents are the most popular and dominate the first floor for the sake of convenience. I mean, the storybooks I mentioned were tucked away in a corner. Hartmut noted that he wanted to see documents in past interduchy tournaments if possible. When he explained they might contain records of previous battles and the Fabies fought during them, both Cornelius and Leonore's eyes started to sparkle. By the time Hartspiel practice came to an end at third bell, a good number of students were interested in going to the library. I decided to bring them all with me. Milady, good morning! Schwartz, Weiss, good morning to you both. You love books? The 2 Schumils asked in unison. I do. My love for them is why I shall try to visit the library every day from now on. I also wish to return the book I had borrowed yesterday. I hope you'll both continue to work your hardest, I said, stroking their face stones. The students who were eyeing Schwartz and Weiss for the first time made surprised noises. So it's true that the library has 2 large Schumils now, one muttered. How adorable! I cannot wait to put up my all into designing clothes for them, added another. I paid no mind to their whispers, as I asked Riarda to handle the book return process with Schwartz, then said good morning to Solange. And good morning to you as well, Lady Rosamond. You have brought many others with you today, I see. They're in search of particular documents, and they were hoping that you could tell them where those might be. Solange tilted her head curiously, at which point Hartmut stepped forward with his request. Do you by chance have any documents about old dinner games played during the interduchy tournaments? I would appreciate the opportunity to read about which duchies fought which Fabies or anything along those lines. We do not have records of our previous dinner games, but there are some strategy books on treasure-stealing dinner among our older documents, Solange replied. We also have records of the winners of past interduchy tournaments, as well as a list of each year's honor students. Hartmut and Cornelius exchanged glances, their eyes gleaming with interest. In terms of strategy, the notes by Eckert and Ferdinand would suffice. What they really wanted were the documents about the past winners of the interduchy tournament. We would like to see the documents regarding the interduchy tournament, I said. Can you tell us where you store those? You always want the strangest resources, Lady Rosamond. Most students only care only about study resources for their classes or books that are profitable to transcribe, Solange said with a smile as she turned around. The reading room prioritizes the study documents that are most regularly used. Archival records and the like are stored in separate rooms. Please wait just a moment. Solange disappeared for a short while, and then she returned with delicately bound documents not from the bookshelves in the reading room, but from a storage room. They were clearly being treated differently, and so I looked up at her with a curious expression. Could it be that we are forbidden from borrowing these? Correct. These materials may not leave the library. After all, it would be quite the pickle if someone refused to return them. You are free to read them here as you like, however. I would take the thick, heavy documents from Solange with a few words of gratitude, but Hartmut immediately stepped forward from beside me and took them in my stead. Lady Rosamond, I shall transcribe these documents. There is information not related to dinner that I wish to know as well. May I borrow Feline to help me? Certainly, I shall trust the transcription to you, Hartmut. It would take Hartmut too long to transcribe them all on his own, as he had smartly decided to spread out the workload. He looked around the library, then gave Solange a bemused frown. Professor Solange, I was hoping for a larger table so that we could transcribe next to each other. Do you have anything other than the carols? You could always line up desks on the second floor, but as those are documents that cannot be borrowed, I would rather they stay as close to me as possible. All the new students have now been registered, so you are welcome to use the registration table in my office. Thank you, Hartmut replied. We will work as fast as we can. With that, Solange guided Hartmut, Feline, and 2 other apprentice scholars into her office. Hartmut immediately got to work telling everyone their roles as he skimmed through the documents, while Feline and the others hurriedly prepared the ink and paper I had provided them with. Solange was fondly eyeing the 4 when she returned to the counter, such that it took her a moment to realize the rest of us were still waiting there. When she did realize, however, an amused smile crept onto her face. Is there anything else I can help with? She asked. Lenore made eye contact with Cornelius, then stepped forward. Do you have any documents about Fabies? I am particularly interested in those detailing how to hunt the Fabies in this area, what the strengths and weaknesses of various species are, and so on. If you're looking for something more in-depth than the basic resources, there's a scroll on the second floor that covers those topics. It is quite old but detailed. A professor who specialized in making magic tools once wrote it based on his experiences collecting materials. It's either, I'm assuming, Justice or Ferdinand. Solange explained as she gingerly began climbing the stairs, still wearing the same amused smile. I must admit this feels quite strange. It is oh so rare for anyone but professors to ask for documents from the second floor. The professors apparently used students who were likely to remain in the Royal Academy as assistant professors to carry documents, and such students were often instructed to read all the resources from one section to another. Solange mentioned that she could tell which students would remain in the academy after graduation based on what they did in the library. Most students who come here seek nothing more than the studied resources, Solange explained. There is a tendency in the Royal Academy for socializing and diplomacy to be prioritized over studying. Studying could always be done in one's home duchy, but only in the Royal Academy did the opportunity arise to interact with those from other duchies. As a result, it only made sense that socializing would take priority regardless of the students' own interests. It seemed this hadn't always been the case, though. In the past, students would receive their staff only at graduation, which had resulted in many being a lot more enthusiastic about their studies. Still, to think that so many are capable of coming to the library despite it not being even a month since this term began, Solange mused. Erinfest certainly has its fair share of excellent students. Upon reaching the second floor, Solange made a beeline for the bookshelf she wanted. The scrolls stored on it looked like the wrapped-up bundle of cloth one would see in art stores, especially considering that the tiny wooden tags hanging from them looked a lot like price tags. Rather than listing any prices, however, these tags were used to identify the scrolls. One by one, Solange checked the tags of all the scrolls on one shelf. She then pulled out one scroll in particular, which she promptly set on a reading table. A reading desk for us. Scrolls naturally couldn't be transcribed while they were rolled up, so they needed to be kept open on a reading stand. Everything is so easy to understand, it even has art, I observed. The scroll written by a past professor covered not just Fabies, but Fae plants as well. It also contained various illustrations, though they weren't particularly good in any sense of the word. I wanted to read it myself when my retainers were done. The scroll was spread out enough to show 2 Fabies descriptions at a time, allowing them to be transcribed simultaneously. As the apprentice knights were the ones who needed information on Fabies, it was one such apprentice knight who began preparing the ink and paper. Lenore, could you copy this picture for me? You've got much better drawing skills than me, Cornelius said, trying to unload the work onto her. I do not mind it. Is drawing something that you struggle with, Cornelius? Lenore asked, intently staring up at him. It's definitely not a specialty of mine, Cornelius replied, averting his gaze out of embarrassment. The smile that Lenore gave him in turn was so warm and gentle that it made something click in my head. Wait, could it be? Is Lenore in love with Cornelius? As soon as I realized that, everything fell into place. I remembered Lenore asking about Angelica's marriage prospects and smacked a fist against my palm. I see. Lenore doesn't want to be a fine lady like Mother. She wants to be Cornelius' first wife. I silently cheered Lenore on. Maybe it was a bit strange of me to say, but the family Bonifacius had created took too much influence from its male members. Their style was very much brawn over brain, so I wanted nothing more than for Lenore to be wedded to the family as a much-needed injection of intellectual thought. In any case, everyone had found the resources they needed, so I returned to the first floor to continue reading stories. When the afternoon came around, Feline left for her practical lessons. Troggot also took Lenore's place as my guard. He and Cornelius fought a little over who would do the transcribing work, with Cornelius ultimately taking up the mantle. I stealthily glanced at his drawings out of curiosity, but they weren't bad at all. Assuming he hadn't just been acting humble before, my art skills really were in a disastrous state. Oh, probably definitely. Lady Rosamond, I would also like to have a leisurely talk at some point soon, Solange said as I was on my way out of the library. It took me a second to realize that what she was talking about, since my mind was so focused on books, but then it hit me. After all, we had discussed the matter just the day before. If you cannot leave the library, Professor Solange, could you perhaps hold the tea party in your office if you want? I could bring the sweets and tea to lessen the burden on you. That would be exceptionally helpful, but are you truly willing to do such a thing? Solange asked with a surprised expression. Following her gaze made it clear that this was more of a question for Riarda, since she would need to make the necessary preparations. Riarda gave a brisk nod. It is no trouble at all. Milady has told us all the details, and this is her way of making things more manageable for you. We are more than willing to prioritize your needs above all else. You are busy managing the library alone, are you not? I asked. I thought about what I could do to make a tea party more feasible for you, and decided on bringing the sweets and tea myself, as though I'm preparing for a picnic. Riarda had been surprised when I first suggested the idea, since it apparently wasn't normal to provide the sweets and tea while borrowing a room from someone else. Still, when I explained to her that it was a solution that I thought up to lessen the burden on Solange, she ultimately understood. I am aware of how busy you are, and my intention is only to reduce the sudden workload a tea party might impose on you. If my approach is too forward, however... No, you are being quite helpful, Lady Rosamond, Solange replied. I do believe I might take you up on your offer. The library gets more visitors on Earth Day, since that's when everyone has the day off, so if possible, I would prefer to hold the tea party the day before on a fruit day. Of course, I'm looking forward to it. In accordance with Solange's needs, the tea party was scheduled for the morning 2 days from now, and it was going to be held in her office. I told my attendants the plan the moment I returned to the dormitory, which caused Brunhilde to gawk in surprise. She had never expected a tea party with Solange to be scheduled even before the tea party with the music professors. It was necessary to accommodate Professor Solange, I explained. She wanted to hold it as soon as possible, since more students than usual are visiting the library to see Schwartz and Weiss. Riarda had told me that in order to get the library committee established, I would need to exhibit friendliness rather than overwhelming enthusiasm during the tea party. While we were there, it was also important that we arrange a date on which to measure Schwartz and Weiss. Plus, I wanted to bring the rough drafts of my manuscripts and speak to Solange about her hometown and the stories she knew. I suppose it might be a good thing after all to hold a tea party with Professor Solange first, Brunhilde mused. Her words caught me by surprise. Professor Solange mentioned that she does not interact with the other professors much due to being stuck in the library all winter, I said. Will it not be a fruitless tea party for you, Brunhilde, considering that you want to push trends and fashions? She may be stuck in the library for the duration of winter, but she will socialize during the other seasons like everyone else, no? Also, recall that she was aware of our first years having exceptional grades. She must be socializing to some degree. This tea party will allow us to see how a sovereign noble reacts to our methods, as well as what they think about our clothes, hairpins, and sweets before the larger tea party with many more professors. To Brunhilde, this was the perfect opportunity to gauge how sovereign nobles would react to Ehrenfest culture, which would in turn allow her to better prepare for the tea parties with the music professors. I simply wanted to discuss books, stories, and the clothes that are going to be made for Schwartz and Weiss, I said, but this only made Brunhilde reproachfully narrow her eyes. She glanced at Riarda, then bent forward slightly so that we were at eye level. Following our discussion from before, my attendants had elected to more immediately inform me of my mistakes when it came to socializing. Lady Rosamond, you will want to prepare as many topics in advance as possible. If you do not prepare and focus on other topics, you are likely to speak of nothing but books for the entire tea party. Please do not forget to discuss other matters as well. Professor Solange is a med noble, so she will have no choice but to listen to you with a smile on her no matter what you say. It is for this reason that you must take great care to observe how the people you are speaking to react. Lisletta gave a worried nod of agreement. Lord Wilfrid often mentions that you lose sight of everything else when books are involved. Let us work together so that you can become an Archduke candidate who never forgets to be graceful and who always acts wisely. Do not worry, you guided my sister to graduation, so nothing is beyond your ability. I believe in you, she said, her eyes now full of such intense hope and trust that it honestly hurt to see. I would need to plan well so that I didn't mess up at the tea party, if not for my sake, then for hers. Okay. My first tea party at the Royal Academy. It was the day of my tea party with Solange. I cleaned my hair with Rensham and then had Brunhilde braid it up for me. My clothes and hairstyle were in accordance with the current trends of the Royal Academy, but I also had prominent flower ornaments adorning my hair and chest that would be only visible while I was drinking tea. Brunhilde and Laisletta had tried to do their jobs as attendants and gather information on Solange in preparation for the tea party, but nobody in Ehrenfest knew her preferences, nor did any of my apprentice attendants from other duchies. I didn't yet know what sweets she liked, so I was bringing a basic pound cake. Nobody knows anything about Professor Solange, Brunhilde said. It seems true that she has not recently attended any tea parties. I myself never considered her someone to have tea parties with until you guided us to her, Lady Rosemine. I would have liked to visit the library to discuss matters directly, but I unfortunately did not have the time. Laisletta nodded. As Brunhilde says, she must have been very lonely, spending so much time without anyone to socialize with. Hopefully your tea party does something to assuage that. We intend to provide pound cake with cream, honey, rub jam, and rumtoff as available toppings so that she may choose whatever she prefers. We can also use this to ever so slowly determine her preferences for ourselves. Our plan was to provide a variety of options so that we could then make pound cakes specifically suited to her taste during our subsequent meetups. As for tea, we had chosen blends that nicely paired with each particular topping. It is important that you ask Professor Solange what her preferences are during the tea party, Riarda said, only going on to list a number of other things I would need to bring up as well. Do you have the topics memorized, milady? You cannot use your diptych today, as so an apprentice scholar is going to accompany you to record the conversation. Feline was standing with us. This would be her first job as a scriber, so she was looking much more nervous than I was. Hartmut had been teaching and helping us during our practice sessions, but it was possible we might one day go somewhere no men were allowed to go. Most tea parties didn't require a scholar standing by and taking notes on the conversation, but we were going to be scheduling the measuring today. Plus, I was intending to ask Solange for her opinion on my collection of night stories. Well, that was the explanation we had given, at least. The actual reason was to give Feline some experience working as a scholar, and so that she could write down Solange's reactions to things as per Brunhilde's request. I imagine this will not be so easy for you, Feline, but I trust that you will do a good job, I said. This is my first time holding such expensive paper. My hands won't stop shaking, Feline replied. She had been given some of the failed workshop paper that I normally kept for notes. It was completely insellable, so repurposing it as such was much less wasteful, but she clearly wasn't considering that. Paper and ink are necessary for writing things down, so I suppose you will just need to get used to it. I could lend you my diptych, but those not used to writing in wax will struggle to keep their notes at appropriate size and identify which words to prioritize. Diptychs needed to be small enough to be carried in one hand, meaning there wasn't much writing space on them. For that reason, it was better for Feline to get used to writing on paper. This is an incredibly important job, Brunhilde said. The notes you record at this tea party will inform how we spread our trends in the future, and how we find ways to catch the attention of those from other duchies. Oh, don't frighten her like that, Brunhilde. I couldn't help but giggle as I saw Feline hugging her paper, tears forming in her eyes. Everyone who was tense about the tea party loosened up a little at that. All of my retainers were accompanying me to their tea party. Rosina was coming as well, but as the tea party was being held in an office connected to the reading room, it would be up to Solange whether she actually performed. Either way, it would be rude of me not to bring a musician at all. Am I forgetting anything? I did one final check before leaving the dorm. Riarda had with her cart on which were all the sweets and tea we needed for the tea party. Brunhilde looked me over to make sure my clothes were neat and my hairpin properly positioned, while Feline made sure that she had all her writing materials. Hartmut and my guard knights had seen us go through this process several times already, so they just glanced at each other and shrugged. Wolfried, seeing me pointing around as I checked everything over, shook his head. If Riarda says you're ready, that means you're ready. I'm less worried about you forgetting something and more worried about whether you can socialize properly, he said, his concern clear in his voice. Riarda had spoken to him about my key weaknesses, namely that I tended to lose sight of everything when books got involved, and that I was missing 2 years of important life experience, so he was even more worried than I was about my 2 upcoming tea parties. Wilfred, everything is going to be fine. We have already created a list of non-book-related topics for me to discuss. I think you've got it in you to succeed, but don't let your guard down. I won't. Riarda's going to be with me, so there's nothing to worry about. The sweets and tea were prepared, and come third bell, we were on our way. Welcome, Lady Rosamine, said Solange. Thank you ever so much for inviting me, Professor Solange. I have been very much looking forward to this. We were guided into Solange's office, where the table and chairs used for registering students were arranged in a manner appropriate for a tea party. There was Solange and a woman who seemed to be her attendant. As Solange and I greeted each other, our attendant swiftly began making the necessary preparations for the tea party. Hartmut was telling Feline where she should put the ink and how she should take notes. Meanwhile, my guard knights divided themselves into two groups, with one guarding my back and the other guarding the door. "Milady's here. No reading books now?" Schwartz and Weiss entered the office from the workspace in the library. They looked at me with wide golden eyes and tilted their heads. "Indeed, I am having a tea party with Professor Solange right now. We are going to be deciding some things about your new clothes. So keep up the good work in the meantime," I replied. "We will. New clothes." I gave the two shoemills some more mana, and then they returned to the reading room, their heads bobbing as they walked. Solange watched with a smile. Professor Solange, if you are concerned about the reading room, I would not mind you leaving the door open." "Oh, no, Lady Rosamine, there are a few visitors today, and I am more concerned about the aroma of sweets and tea drifting into the reading room," Solange replied with a chuckle before closing the door behind Schwartz and Weiss. "What shall we do about music? Do you think the noise may leak into the reading room?" I asked. Ivory buildings tended to excel at dampening sound, but the door itself was made of wood, which was hardly soundproof. Solange looked at Rosina and her harpspiel and fell into thought for a moment. Then her blue eyes crinkled in amusement. "She's going to play those unique songs you composed yourself, yes? I would certainly like to hear one. I do not get to participate in our tea parties, so it has been a long time since I have felt such excitement," she said with breathless restraint. I glanced over at Rosina. "In that case, my musician shall perform for you a song I was planning to debut at my tea party with the music professors. It is dedicated to Mestinora, the goddess of wisdom, so I believe it will be perfect for the first performance to be here in the library." Solange widened her eyes. "Oh, would that truly be acceptable?" she asked, cautiously looking at my retainers. I nodded with a smile. It wasn't like I had promised the music professors anything. My original lyrics were in praise of the library, after all. My retainers, who knew that I had thought up the lyrics in my excitement to visit the library, all struggled to remain stone-faced as they tried to contain their laughter. "Oh, yeah. In that case, please do play the song after we have had our tea," Solange said. Rosina sat down in a chair that Solange's attendant had prepared for her, then readied her harpspiel such that she could play the second she was instructed to. Riarda began preparing the tea, while Brunhilde leaned out the pound cake and decorative toppings on plates. Solange looked at the pound cake before her, and then at all the supplements, blinking in surprise all the while. "What is this, Lady Rosamine?" she asked. "I have never seen sweets quite like this." As expected, pound cake was considered an unusual sweet in the sovereignty. I could already see Brunhilde's amber eyes sparkling as she analyzed Solange's reaction with keen interest. "It is pound cake, a sweet that has quite recently become popular in Ehrenfest. You may find it is a little different from sovereign sweets, but I hope you like it nonetheless," I explained. I could imagine that someone used to the excessively sugary foods served in the sovereignty might find pound cake somewhat bland. You can add cream and jam of your choosing. We have whipped cream, red jams, honey, and Rumtoff. Rumtoff, is that another Ehrenfest specialty? The fruits are steeped in wine to preserve them. You may have something similar, but in Ehrenfest we call it Rumtoff. Solange looked over the finely chopped Rumtoff and repeatedly nodded to herself. As it turned out, in her home duchy, they would steep highly acidic fruits like lemons in honey to preserve them for the winter. "I would suggest taking a bite of your pound cake without any toppings first, then pairing it with whatever takes your fancy," I said, taking a bite of my sweet and sipping my tea. Solange sipped her tea, then she brought a small piece of pound cake to her mouth. Interest, highly curious to see what a sovereign noble would think. She swallowed, and then a little smile touched her lips. "The light flavor is quite nice," she said, "and the mouthfeel is pleasant. I cannot talk." So much butter was used in the making of a pound cake that nothing about it could really be described as light. But the clumps of sugar the sovereignty dared to call sweets were evidently so intense that even pound cake seemed to have a subtle taste in comparison. I was aware that the sovereignty also served tea that was rather bitter. I, on the other hand, was serving a softer kind that paired nicely with our sweets. "You may add jam and honey if you feel the pound cake is not sweet enough," I said, taking a demonstrative bite with each of the prepared toppings before piling cream and Rumtoff onto the rest of my pound cake. "Ah, so I can experiment with different combinations. I am excited to see what effect they have on the taste," Solange said as her attendant started adding a touch of cream and jam to her pound cake. She took a bite with each and then broke into a smile. "I feel as though I could eat this forever," she concluded. The sweets served in the sovereignty were all exquisitely crafted, but even sovereign nobles could only handle one or two in a single sitting. Solange ultimately took a liking to honey and jam the most, as expected. The plain pound cake wasn't sweet enough for her. Perhaps she and the other sovereign nobles would rather the pound cake be made with honey in the first place, rather than having to add it on themselves. You always wear hair ornaments of that unique style, Lady Rosemine. Have they also become popular in Ehrenfest? Solange asked. I haven't seen any other Ehrenfest students wearing them before now. My personal seamstress makes them, I replied, gingerly touching my hairpin. I first debuted them in the Ehrenfest nobility during my baptism. An ornament of flowers are now used to decorate not just one's hair, but one's clothing as well. This trend has not yet spread too far, though, so they are quite difficult to make. Hairpins were essentially being monopolized by the Gilberta Company. They had been in production for several years now, but it wasn't particularly accurate to say they were widespread. They look very cute, Solange said. There are many girls even here in the Royal Academy who are curious about them. I had brought all my hairpins with me to the Royal Academy and was wearing a different one each day to demonstrate all the available colors. It seemed that my becoming a walking advertisement had paid off. My adopted father has said that if our hairpins attract enough interest, will be mentioned at the next Archduke conference. The adults didn't want us kids making significant business deals on our own, so we, as students, the most we could do was market our products. We would show them off at tea parties, hand out a few for free, and emphasize their good points. The actual buying and selling would be settled among the Archdukes at the Archduke conference. I am certain they will be deemed worthy of discussion, Solange said. Never before have I seen the three-dimensional flowers on a hair ornament, and your glossy hair will only draw more attention to them. Might I ask what your secret is? I use something called Rin Sham when washing my hair in the bath. It has spread like wildfire among the women, and I am hoping it can become a primary export for Ehrenfest, which currently lacks any exports of note. Ehrenfest is striving to create a variety of original products to reinvent our duchy. Shut up! And I wish to do my part as an Archduke candidate by helping spread them to the best of my ability. The conversation settled down as we ate the sweets, and I used that opportunity to have Rosina play Harpspiel. A high note resounded throughout the air as she plucked the first string. Then she began playing the song dedicated to Mestinora, the goddess of wisdom, singing in her graceful voice. Alas, my library anthem has turned into a religious hymn. Rosina had completely erased the word library from the lyrics after I entrusted them to her, but Solange listened quite happily nonetheless, her blue eyes brimming with tears as she enjoyed the song dedicated more or less to the patron deity of libraries. Splendid, Lady Rosemine. There are hardly any songs dedicated to Mestinora, the goddess of wisdom. I am moved beyond words, Solange said. I am glad you were enjoying it, Professor Solange. There were a great number of songs dedicated to the King and Queen gods, the Eternal Five, and the goddess of art. There were also many dedicated to the god of war, used to boost the soldiers' morale, but there were very few dedicated to the goddess of wisdom. Once the performance was over, it was time to discuss the measuring for Schwartz and Weiss's new clothes. I wanted to go through this part quickly. Professor Solange, might I ask what time is most convenient for us to come measure Schwartz and Weiss? The sooner the better, I imagine. If you were to prioritize any my circumstances, sooner would indeed be better. More and more girls have been visiting the library to see them. It truly takes me back to how things used to be, Solange said with a warm smile. It seemed that the two shoe mills had also been popular attractions in the library long ago. Where would you like us to measure them? I was thinking we could do it here in the office, if taking them outside the library is not ideal. Schwartz and Weiss have many expensive face stones, and they are equipped with a number of protective charms to prevent any potential thievery, Solange replied. It would be best to measure them in an environment you can manage carefully as their master. Just the thought of taking Schwartz and Weiss out of the library made me nervous, but if Solange was saying it was my responsibility as their master to take them into my care, I would have to accept that she was correct. So I can bring them to the Ehrenfest dormitory? Yes, of course, you are their master now. Please create appropriate new clothes for them both. The truth is, I have several potential designs already. Which do you think would suit them most? At the moment, I intend to dress Schwartz in male clothes and Weiss in female clothes. It is already decided that they will wear flower ornaments just like me, or as well as committee armbands, but... I glanced at Lazletta, who promptly produced the organized collection of clothing designs. Solange accepted them and broke into a smile as she looked them over. These are all very cute. I simply ask that you take care not to give them too many accessories, she said. Back when Solange had just started working as a librarian, the first change of clothes Schwartz and Weiss received from their new master had apparently included hats, brooches, and accessories galore. They were even given billowing sleeves to match those of their master, simply because it made them look especially cute. However, their hats would fall off whenever they were trying to work, and their billowy sleeves would knock the large golds being handed over as deposits onto the floor, Solange explained. It was quite the mess. Oh my! Even so, Schwartz and Weiss made no attempts to remove these accessories. We arranged for new outfits to be made as soon as possible, but until they were finished, we had a librarian dedicated solely to watching over them. Ever since that incident, it has been customary to have the sleeves go only to their elbows. My perspective on Schwartz and Weiss's new clothes changed completely once I realized they also need to be practical. The designs we had were very much focused on cuteness, meaning they would probably need to be adjusted. Speaking of which, Professor Herscher mentioned that Schwartz and Weiss can only be touched by their master. Will it be safe for others to measure them? They can be touched by those who have their master's permission. That said, be careful whom you give that permission to. Those who can touch Schwartz and Weiss can also steal or damage them. I see. In that case, I will take the utmost care, especially knowing what Professor Herscher's like. We decided on taking Schwartz and Weiss to be measured 3 days from now, and with that settled, I changed the subject on taking out my collection of night stories. I am in the process of collecting the stories told by minstrels, by mothers to their children, and so on. You have seen many books, Professor Solange, and so I would very much love to hear your opinion on this, I said, handing over the stack of several dozen sheets. Solange blinked in surprise and started to look over the stories. Her expression was serious, though her smile never faltered. It must have been difficult to gather this many stories. How in the world did you manage it? I had a lot of assistance. Children are raised on stories, so just asking them to write down what they remember can reap significant rewards. Oh, I like Solange. She's nice. I couldn't exactly say that I had baited children into gathering stories for me in exchange for learning materials, so I simply smiled and hoped that she wouldn't dig any deeper. Do you think there's a market for stories like these? I asked. Who can say? There are stories that children would no doubt love, but adults and older students in the academy might prefer stories of another kind. It certainly is time that we start thinking about books for adults. I will discuss this matter with Abba Ehrenfest. I was currently making picture books with Camille in mind, but to establish a culture of reading for fun in the Royal Academy, I needed more mature books for the older students. If y'all don't shut up in there, I'm gonna come smack ya! My first thoughts were to evolve the night stories into more specialized forms, having some with detailed fight scenes based on the Fabies data we had started to accumulate, some with hints on how to successfully play dinner mixed in, and some for girls that focus on romance. Oh, you're gonna be opening a can of worms with that whole romance thing, too. You better run that by Ferdinand and the others first. As my mind raced with ideas, Solange finished reading the night stories and returned the manuscript. I snapped back to reality and accepted it, then I handed it to Laisletta, who was standing at the ready behind me. Certainly are many unique things in Ehrenfest, don't you agree? Solange commented. This is my first time leaving Ehrenfest, so I am not sure what is considered unusual outside our duchy. But if a sovereign noble such as yourself says there are many strange things, then I suppose there are. What exactly do you consider strange? I asked, wanting her opinion to help inform how Ehrenfest should market its goods. Solange looked up at my hair before responding. The product that makes one's hair glossy, the hair ornaments, the sweets. These are many strange things, but what I am most curious about is the paper your apprentice scholar is writing on. Am I correct to assume it's not regular parchment? Oh, yes. Indeed, parchment is made using animal skin, but not this paper. We are in the process of establishing its production as a major industry within Ehrenfest. What makes it special is that, unlike parchment, it can be mass-produced. My hope is that everyone knows about it by the end of this term. I was doing my best to preach the virtues of plant paper, so was the extent of my role. It would then be down to Sylvester to negotiate business contracts during the Archduke Conference. He wanted to know how much resistance we might face, and while we were now informing people of the new plant paper and ink, we were still keeping printing a secret. This new paper is cheaper to produce than parchment, but as it must be written on with a special type of ink, it is not remarkably cheap yet. Oh, a special type of ink? Yes, the ink used on parchment can be used on our new paper, but for the sake of long-term preservation, the new type is ideal. For simple notes and the like, however, either type will do, I explained, noticing her interest. My goodness, Solange exclaimed, looking at me with wide eyes. You use paper for notes? I received damaged paper from Ob Ehrenfest's workshops, which I then used for a variety of purposes. Fran, Riarda, and the others had also initially been taken aback by the idea, stating that it was a waste, but since I kept using it for notes anyway, they all eventually grew used to it. Honestly, it had been so long since anyone had expressed surprise about my plant paper that Solange's reaction caught me off guard. Official contracts are still written on parchment, so this new paper is primarily used in place of wooden boards, I said. You would free up quite a bit of space on the bookshelves if you were to replace the boards with it. What a delightful suggestion. The lack of shelf space has always been a big problem for us. If you wish, Professor Solange, I could give you a few sheets. Normal ink will last on them for several decades. I gave Solange a few sheets, which she looked and poked and prodded with great interest. She was more interested in the plant paper than the sweets or my hairpins, but just as I realized this, 4th bell rang. Solange glanced up at the papers to look at her attendant, who gave a slight nod. Yes, Lady Solange, it is time to end the tea party. If we didn't return to the dormitory soon, my retainers would be late for their afternoon classes. The attendants delicately but speedily cleaned up, while Solange and I exchanged farewells. To think that 4th bell came so quickly. It seemed that Dragonard, the goddess of time, has woven today's threads with exceptional speed and grace, I said. I regret having to leave so soon, but I must depart. It has been a long time since I enjoyed myself so thoroughly, Solange replied. You have my gratitude, Lady Rosemine. It certainly was a productive tea party. I learned many important things about Schwartz and Weiss today. I imagine it might be a struggle to find the time, but I would very much like to meet with you like this again. I suppose I shall eagerly await next year, when you no doubt finish all your classes early again. I was pretty satisfied that Solange had enjoyed her first tea party in quite a long time. My retainers had their own opinions concerning what people would think about Ehrenfest, but we didn't have the time to talk it all over right now. We hurried back to the dorm, leaving the discussion and detailed reporting for later. Okay, I'm gonna have to end it there, and I'll see you guys next time.